Okay, this video is going to be a book review. This is part one. It's going to be in several parts because there's a lot of material to cover here. This is the author's name, Rodney Stark. This is the name of the book, How the West Won. You know, the neglected story of the triumph of modernity. So what the book is about is why is it that almost everything in modern technology comes from the West? Why was it so completely dominant over all the other societies in the world? If you go to a public school, you've been brainwashed with all this nonsense about multiculturalism, that all cultures are equal and everything is the same. That's all nonsense. The reality is Western civilization is up here in terms of its academic and technological superiority to all other civilizations. None of them are even close. None of them are even in the same ballpark. Almost everything you could think of the modern inventions came from the West. There's a few exceptions, the audio CD from Japan, and there's a few other ones, okay? But almost everything came from the West. And the question is why? Okay, and you're going to find the answer is Christianity. That may surprise you, but that's the unique thing about the West. There's other countries that had plenty of iron ore and mineral ores, okay? They had warmer climates to improve growing food, but they still couldn't compete. So let me just show you some of the pictures first, and then we'll get into the text of the book. This right here is the coronation of Charlemagne in 800 AD, and that's also called, you know, Charlemagne, Charles the Great. It's also Carol is another way to phrase it in different European languages. So this was the Carolingian Renaissance, whereby he had Alcuin, the scholar, to promote a good academic education in his students. And again, they call themselves the Holy Roman Empire. He saw this as a renewal of ancient Rome, the Roman Empire. Okay. All right, so let me show you some other pictures here. Here is Copernicus, who was like a deacon in the Catholic Church and an astronomer, and he came up with the heliocentric theory of astronomy, that the sun is in the center. And, you know, everybody talks about Galileo. That's about the only negative thing you'll hear about the Catholic Church. It actually turns out they had tons of people involved in astronomy. They wanted to make their calendars good. If you just go to the moon, 35 craters on the moon are named after Jesuit priests. They were the dominant force in astronomy for many hundreds of years. Okay. The whole university system comes from the Catholic Church. They founded the modern university. Here's a typical scientist, you know, Kepler, okay, probably the greatest astronomer that ever lived, certainly one of them. He figured out the epicycles and some other things about astronomy. He says, for many years I wanted to be a theologian, but I see how God is also praised by my work in astronomy. Science is the process of thinking God's thoughts after him. The laws of nature are within the grasp of the human mind. That's an important point. Western civilization says that a rational God created a rational universe, and we are created in his image, such that we too may be a creator, that we may understand his thoughts, okay? I am merely thinking God's thoughts after him. The chief aim of studying the external world is to discover the rational order and the harmony imposed on it by God, which he reveals to us in the language of mathematics. The wisdom of the Lord is infinite. The heavens declare the glory of God. It does not matter if my book finds its reader in 100 or even 1,000 years. Has not God himself waited 6,000 years for a human mind to be capable of gazing on his celestial spheres with understanding? So Kepler is saying it took 6,000 years for someone as smart as him to come along and figure out the planetary orbits. Okay, and what I'm trying to say is this is a typical mentality of these ancient great scientists, these old-time great scientists, all right? Here's Isaac Newton. You know, he says basically the same type of thing, spend more than half his time. So what I'm trying to say is, why did all the science, modern science only came out of Europe? There was no modern scientific method in the other countries. It didn't exist, okay? And it's because a lot of places, even though they got tons of high IQ people, they had these like philosophies like Maya in India that, you know, the world was unknowable. What's the point? Just go meditate and stuff. So Isaac Newton, you know, he's spent half his time studying and reading the Bible and writing about the Bible. And then in the rest of his time, he's figured out the law of gravity, the fundamental laws of physics, including optics, motion, etc. Okay? He invented calculus. Here's Michael Faraday, you know, oops, I meant to keep that slide. How did I lose that one? Go to previous. Michael Faraday, you know, just working in a bookshop, a poor guy, and then he ended up discovering all these rules and principles of electricity and electromagnetism. Okay. Here's James Watt, the Scottish inventor, invented the steam engine, you know, and then pretty soon you had steamboats, locomotives, okay? guy from Scotland. And here's another guy. This guy, Eli Whitney, invented the cotton gin, which made it much more profitable, growing cotton and making it into clothes. Here is Henry Ford with one of his early cars, and he developed the concept efficiently of the assembly line for mass-producing goods. Okay? You know, initially, the Industrial Revolution was primarily in England, but then the United States sort of took over and became the dominant manufacturing power by the 1920s. Here's an assembly line at Ford's car-making plant. Okay. All of this stuff, why did it only happen in the West? Here's the the Wright brothers, Orville and Wilbur Wright, inventors of the airplane. So the West is the inventor of the airplane, inventor of the automobile. Thomas Edison, inventor of the light bulb. Tesla, alternating current, Edison, direct current. The phonograph, playing records, LPs, long play albums. Marconi invented the radio, but Tesla was involved in that as well. He's from Italy, Marconi. But what I'm trying to say is Alexander Graham Bell. We're going to come to all of them. Here's Shockley, who invented the transistor. William Shockley. Okay, here's Nikolai Tesla, who did a lot of brilliant work. And, Edison kind of was ripping him off. He's a Yugoslavian guy that came to America. Thomas Edison, with his laboratory, made tons of that. He had like 1,000 patents. Here's Alexander Graham Bell, with the invention of the telephone. What I'm trying to say is, why did this all come from the West? And it's because Christianity inspired them to do science, and the other places were not inspired to do it. They believed it was possible, and therefore they went for it. There's lots of high IQ people all over the world. And also, Christianity tells you that life has meaning. It's worth doing something. If you end up in atheistic Darwinism, then you say to yourself, why do anything? Life has no meaning. Why give people freedom if you're the ruler, if they're nothing but atheistic Darwinism, talking apes? When you have Christianity, you say all men are created in the image of God, therefore they're part divine. They're not just talking animals. Because in other countries where you have tyrannical rulers, they just treat the people as livestock. They're basically like a bunch of farm animals they own. That is the attitude of the ruler. It is Christianity that got rid of slavery. There's still slavery in almost every single other country of the world that's not Christian. Okay, there's even slavery in the United States, just most people don't know about it. Okay, the Holy Grail of wisdom health, the idea of King Arthur, freedom and equality, Patrick Henry, all this freedom and equality stuff that comes out of. The founding fathers of the USA are the greatest founding fathers of any country that's ever existed, saying things like, all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, including life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, endowed by their Creator, by God. Okay? It's important to understand this because you've been taught a lot of nonsense at the public schools, and it makes you think that everything's the same. It's not. Other places don't have freedom of speech. Other people don't have, a constitution or all these rights. Okay, signing of the Declaration of Independence. And it's a bunch of guys, all this stuff about, everyone's the same. It's nonsense. There were no women involved in this stuff. Okay, this was a bunch of men, a bunch of Christian men. That's the founding of the United States. Okay, it was a Christian country, a Christian republic. And it was founded on the principles of the old Roman Republic. Here's a couple guys who've written and talked a lot about this. I've heard of this guy before, Charlie Kirk. This guy probably, David Barton, one of the best USA historians. Okay, here's a picture of, what it was like in the early days. Our founding fathers, they would have mass in the same rooms in which they would legislate, okay? It was intrinsically deep in them. There were lots of pastors involved. Back in those days, they didn't have any of these 503 tax exemption rules, so pastors were allowed to speak. The purpose of that 503 extension stuff, came around the 1960s, was to basically put a muzzle on all the pastors so they could no longer say anything interesting. And it really destroyed the churches. It made them worthless to go to because the pastor's not allowed to say anything interesting. So here's the American founding fathers praying to their Christian God. Okay, all right, and if you don't have Christianity, here's what ends up happening. You end up like, France, and the big France Rev, 1789, 1793. What do? They pull out the guillotine and start, lopping off people's, their heads, okay? That's what you get with atheism because it denies the dignity, the significance of the individual. And once you go down that path, the ruler just goes insane and it becomes, a red river, okay? This is factual. This is well known, all right? So when you've got Christianity and, all men deserve rights, you end up with things like this, the Continental Congress, to, have the amendments to give people free speech and other amenities. So there's GW, there's Ben Franklin, Alexander Hamilton. Thomas Jefferson at this time was, I think, in France as an ambassador. Okay, but this is where it came from, all these guys. Okay, and it was just a bunch of men. There were no women here. Okay, it's just how it was. All right, so anyways, with that in mind, now I'm going to go into the book. I'll make that part two because it's a lot of material to cover.